on my way.
Hey, it's Camo. Welcome to Nashville Meets World, and woohoo, I get to hold something up. This is In the Hills of Tennessee, the Uncivil War, 1862, and my guest today is this book's author, Rick Revel. How you doing, Rick?
Good to see you, sir.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on the show today to talk about the book.
Yeah.
This is historical fiction.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
The Chronicles of Captain Jack Hinson, who was...
Well, this is a true story based on a gentleman that lived in Stewart County, not too far from here.
All right.
We're in Dover area.
Right. And so it's the true story, but you fictionalized it, put in different characters.
It pretty much goes from the historical aspect and all the historical events that take place and try to stay in context with what took place.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the dialogue or what they say to each other, that is where the fiction comes in. So their interaction and their dialogue with one another, that's kind of the fiction.
Yeah.
But I try to keep the
Keep it
historical
as
timeline.
historical as possible.
Yeah, so when you read about the Battle of Fort Donelson, I try to keep it as accurate as possible.
This whole area was a real hot town.
Oh, yes.
Battle of Franklin, Battle of Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
Those were two very big battles.
Mm-hmm.
What other ones were around this area?
Well, of course, you've had a lot of small things like Thompson Station,
Yeah.
which was a pretty good cavalry battle there. Of course, you had Shiloh further west in West Tennessee. So then you had Chickamauga and Chattanooga,
Right.
and then you had a battle in Knoxville also.
Which it's odd considering the fact that Tennessee was rather late to join the Confederacy.
Mm-hmm.
And even then Tennessee was kind of Confederacy light. They weren't
Somewhat.
they weren't as committed to as some other stations. It was more of a divided state.
Yeah,
really.
it was strictly a lot of brother against brother and father against son type of situations. When you look at the Civil War in terms of the way the state of Tennessee is set, you've got Virginia has the most battles.
Yeah.
Tennessee is second only to Virginia.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, so the
Wow.
number of battles were tremendous. So we're starting from small skirmishes where you might have two smaller units fighting one another to full-blown battles. So we're second only to Virginia.
Wow, I had no idea that Tennessee was so
Covered from one end of the state to the next. And the further east you go and you get around Knoxville in that area, there was far more people that were for the Union, what we would call the galvanized, or the, some considered them turncoats because they were the Union Blue, but they considered themselves patriot. You get West Tennessee, they were considered rebels, but they considered themselves patriot, and they all fought for Confederacy.
Yeah,
So,
it's all a matter of perspective.
perspective.
Which, same thing today, I guess. The more things change, the more things stay the same.
Yes. All things old become new again.
That's right.
Kind of how I look at it.
How did you get into, because you're not only an author, you're an artist, a singer, and a songwriter. How did you decide that it was time to write a novel about the Civil War?
Well, a friend of mine, Tom McKinney, wrote a biography on Jack Hinson, and I was very intrigued by it. Somebody gave me the book as a gift, and I was very intrigued by it. So I wrote a song. I've written songs for years here in Nashville, and I wrote a song about it called The Ballad of Captain Jack, and ran across Tom at a Civil War reenactment in Erin, Tennessee. And he was doing a book signing, and so I wanted to play the song for him. So somebody introduced us, played the song, and he just chuckled and he said, "Man, I love the song. Can I take this song with me and can I promote my book with it?" And I said, "Well, sure, as long as you take me with you, and I'll do the song." And so that's kind of how it went. And so we got to be friends as we traveled around, and I would sing the song and promote his book. And of course, I gave him a CD that he could do it with also when I couldn't be with him. But our friendship grew, and I said, it would be neat because it's a killer subject. And I thought, wow, a movie could be made of this. And he said, "Could you write a script based on my book?" And I said, "Well, sure." So I did that.
Was it, you knew you could write a script, or was it one of those things, I'll say yes and I'll figure out how to do it?
I've written a few. I've written a few
Okay.
for some things, and so I wrote that one, and he, once again, as soon as he started reading it, he started chuckling and says, I like what you did with him. You brought him to life. You put a voice to my character.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, he was seeing his character speak words. Where when in the biography, he wrote about what he did,
Right.
but didn't give him a real voice. So I gave his character a voice, and he liked that. Then the next challenge, he said, could you take that script and make a historical fiction novel out of it? Then that's when the challenge came on of what is a historical fiction novel. So I had to define what that was, and basically that's kind of the way you work it. You try to keep it as historically accurate as possible, but you set those characters into some fictionalized scenarios based around history and then their dialogue.
Because they've interacted with people that aren't part of record.
Right.
So you have to have that interaction.
Yes.
You can't just base everything on record, and that would be really stiff and boring.
It is, and a lot of, and I try to do it from the whole standpoint to where I bring the other people that live there. So it's just not about Jack Hinson, it's about his neighbors and the other people that live there. Their homes were burned and their livestock was stolen from them or confiscated from them. And how did they survive? What did they do? There's a chapter in there that talks about 6 built in 6 days. And they wind up coming together doing barn raisings and house raisings, trying to help one another. But that became a futile effort because as soon as they got them built, the Union Army would burn them down.
Yeah.
So it was a futile effort.
There's that, and you mentioned another aspect before about the whole brother on brother thing. A great movie that's a prime example of that is Shenandoah, starring Jimmy Stewart,
Right.
because that shows how the Civil War divided families and how tough that was.
Yeah, it was a very tough time, and even in Jack's realm. See, of course, there's varied opinions amongst historians, but the best thing that I can find on Jack, Tommy talked about him trying to remain neutral, and I found in the records where he actually had felt, it kind of seemed like he possibly did in the beginning, but when Tennessee voted for secession, he did vote for it.
Right.
But a lot of people that was against it eventually voted for it, and one was Senator John Bell. He had petitioned time and time again not to secede from the Union. And then after a visit with Abraham Lincoln and Lincoln promising Senator John Bell that they would never invade the South, right after their little conversation in March, the invasion begins. And so Senator John Bell comes back home and begins to say, hey, you know, we've been misled, and he began to say, hey, you know, we may need to consider secession in order to protect our things. And they looked at the states then as autonomy. They actually were standalone. Where today,
People forget that when you compare it to Europe, they're not called countries necessarily, they're called states. And that's what the U.S. was set up as, individual countries
right,
that were brought together to provide
united together.
Together for defense, for flow of interstate commerce.
Right.
There were only a few basic things that the federal government was intended to do.
And ironically, before we had a constitution, I'm working on a television show called History Highway also. So I went to Murray State University and we were interviewing some of the students there and kicking some things around. And you'd be surprised where we are education-wise in the country. I was almost appalling when we got to talking, because the Declaration of Independence, before we had that, right after we had the Declaration of Independence, we had the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
We were a confederacy.
Yeah.
Before we became a constitutional
republic. Yeah.
Right. And so that didn't work. They tried to bring the 13 colonies, 13 states together in the Confederacy, and it was too loose. They felt it was too loose and couldn't bond them together. And so that was the reason they rewrote something and became the Constitution that we know today.
And you have the same issues that Europe is going through now with the European Union, they've got a common currency, but you can't have a common currency without a common economic policy. And it was the same thing that was happening back then. States had their own money, even cities had their own
and
money.
had their own trade policies.
Right. So it was exactly the same thing.
And that, honestly, of course, there's varied opinions on this also, but when you go back to the Morrell Tariff Act and all the different things that really ignited the war, when you look back, the South at that time was trying to remain as independent as possible and was selling cotton, cotton was king in terms of the amount that was being produced. They were selling to France and selling to England. And they were doing it in the North, which also had textile mills. They said, we want it. And so they decided they would pass a bill that would put a tariff on all Southern cotton. So basically, you pay a tariff going out, and then it'd be paid coming back in when it was made into a garment or made into a bulk of material.
The Civil War was a very complicated
Yes, very much so.
thing. And we've had Cody Engdahl in here, who's a terrific author.
Yeah, very familiar with Cody.
And he had published a book called, and it's recently too, the Civil War was about slavery.
Sure.
Because so many people defend it and say, well, it wasn't about slavery. Slavery was a byproduct of it, but it was about states' rights. But it was about slavery. That was immediate. That was the thing. But there were also many other things.
Sure.
Economic things that
there was a lot of things economic wise that brought into perspective. But I think a lot of times, once again, it depends on where we live.
Yeah.
If you lived in the northern region of the country, then for you, it would possibly have been that for slavery. Yeah. In the South, according to the 1860 census, less than 10% of the Southern population owned slaves.
Because it was only wealthy landowners that could have them.
And most of them were the politicians.
Right.
A lot of those were politicians, so they voted for what was of their self-interest.
And people also forget there were slaves in the North as well.
Mm-hmm. And the very last state to abolish slavery is New Jersey.
Wow. So
that was after the war was over.
And this stuff isn't being taught in school.
It's not being taught anymore. And so so that's how politicians today, we're jumping, big jump here, but that's how we get fooled today.
Because people take things out of context and pick and choose, and that's always gone on. And it's not just the Civil War; it's everything. When history isn't taught, there's nobody saying, "Hey, wait a second, that's not right."
Yeah, and a lot of the students today that I interviewed, some of I feel will be well prepared. There's some that just kind of makes your heart hurt. It's like, wow, they're going to be easily deceived. Yeah. And that the Bible talks about it. And of course, it's doing it from a scriptural context of my people perish for the lack of knowledge, and it's basically referring to biblical knowledge. Yeah. But even historically speaking, we're perishing for the lack of knowledge about the founding of our country. So that's kind of scary.
And yet, we have the easiest access to all the knowledge in the world at a click.
At a click.
But that is being taken over by people that have figured out the algorithms to put out nonsense.
Yes. And to shut down things that they don't agree with.
That's not just a political thing, too. That's everything.
Yes.
I asked this question to Cody because I'm originally from Canada, lived in England for a long time. My family, I was a second generation Canadian, so I have no background in the Civil War at all, other than studying it in school. Do you think this country will ever get past the Civil War?
I think it's hard to. I think politicians will hit it on. I think they refester the wounds all the time. If you keep picking at a wound,
it doesn't heal.
It doesn't heal, and it just makes it worse. And it actually can spread through your body system and poison your system. And I think that's where we are today. I think politicians utilize that to their advantage, and I think that's where we are. They're always going to use it to their advantage. That's because I've been in one of my business partners years ago was a black gentleman. I've had bands where half my musicians were all black, and I'm in the South, and most of my friends are black, and it's like, why are you trying to divide us?
Yeah.
Don't drive a wedge between me and my friends. And that's what they try to do.
Usually it's the old statement, follow the money.
Follow the money. That's what it always is.
Yes.
Follow the money trail.
Yeah. So how's the book doing?
Book's doing excellent. It's just unreal. I did a little sweepstakes drawing because I did all the art in the about 25 pieces of the art in the book. Of course, the cover and the back cover are artwork that I've done, and that back cover piece is called "Waiting for Grant." It's where General Buckner surrendered to Grant. And so I did a sweepstakes, and I said everybody that wants to enter the contest, the drawing, they will need to send in their picture reading the book. And it's just been gangbusters. I've had hundreds of people send in their pictures of them reading the book. And it's just incredible how many people have done that. And so, and the book is sold from West Coast to East Coast, North and South.
Wow.
I've shipped one to Denmark.
Wow.
I've shipped them to Canada.
That brings another
Oregon.
question.
Yes.
Why is there this fascination with, even the romanticization of the Civil War outside the U.S.? There are American Civil War reenactors in the UK.
Oh yeah.
And other countries. What is the fascination?
And I correspond with some of them. The gentleman from Denmark, he's a Civil War reenactor, and his name is Leif. And he's one that loves the book and took a picture with the book. So it's interesting. I think it's the same as I did martial arts growing up, and I guess it's the same fascination I had with all the martial art movies way back when. It's a different culture. Something different, and I think that different part is what attracts them, but I think some of them see the story, that they feel it, they feel the plight maybe of the Southerner, or they feel the plight of the slavery, or they feel the plight of another individual. I think they personally get involved because when you talk to some of the reenactors from other countries, they adopt the personality, and that's what you do as a reenactor. You adopt the personality either of an ancestor,
right,
or somebody that you admire from history. So that's kind of what you do as a reenactor or a living historian a lot of times. I find it very fascinating that
Hollywood, though, sorry to interrupt, but Hollywood too, over the years has made sweeping films of, the most famous being Gone with the Wind, and so people are seeing that and taking the romance of that.
For instance, I brought the album with me that I did a re-release on it 25 years ago. I had some songs that was hitting the charts and everything, so I thought, well, I'll just go do a little re-release on it, see what happens. As soon as I put the word out, I had a few here in the country that sent me responses back, but I started getting responses in Europe.
Well,
and so this is already played this past week. This was 2 weeks ago. I re-released it.
well,
I already started getting airplay in Europe.
Making It in America,
Yeah.
Rick Revel, that's the album.
Yeah, so that's what's very interesting about it. They really love American culture over there.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe sometimes. But we took to the Beatles and we took to Mick Jagger and that
Switching
music.
around,
So they have interest in our country music. And it's old country music. It's the grand old opera style country music they really attract.
No drum machines then.
Very little. Very little. And no.
Yeah, no finger snaps and chanting. So, do you have any plans to do another book?
This is book one of a series. Actually, do 62 and 63 will come up coming up this time next year. I hope to have it out. Basically, in a nutshell, you try to remain neutral. The Union Army kind of had this vendetta against him. There's a group in there called the Irish Dragoons, a real group of people that were from St. Louis, Illinois. They were with the 5th Iowa Cavalry. Here's a weird thing. 5th Iowa Cavalry didn't have a single person from Iowa in the unit. They're all from Kansas, Minnesota, or Missouri.
Right.
And the Irish Dragoons were from St. Louis, Missouri area. And so they had this vendetta for Jack's family for quite some time. They wound up burning down Jack's store. He had a store in Dover. And the sons go home because they no longer have a store to work, a place to work. And so they go home. They're out squirrel hunting. And Colonel Lowe of the 5th Iowa Cavalry had put out a decree that if they found anybody, because guerrilla warfare was growing.
Yeah, the quadruple raiders.
Yeah, it was growing, so they said anybody you find that you consider a bushwhacker, you can execute them on the spot.
Yeah.
Boys are out squirrel hunting, as the story goes. They have rifles, they're shooting at squirrels, so Irish Dragoons find them. There's their license to kill right there. They find them armed, so they take them out and execute them.
Yeah.
Then they take it further. After they execute them, they wind up beheading them. And they take and put the heads on the gatepost of Jack's home. And supposedly that's when Jack's neutrality vanishes. And so he goes and he finds a man to build him a special made rifle that'll shoot a heavy charge of powder, up to 120 grains of powder. The barrel stick, the gun itself weighs 18 pounds. It exists. It's in Murfreesboro.
Yeah.
A friend of mine there, a judge in Murfreesboro, owns the gun.
Wow.
It still exists. We've traveled some together talking about the gun and Jack. Heavy gun. In book 2, that's what we do. We pick up the men that killed his sons. There was about 15 of them. And how I found the men is I went back to the original muster rolls. And next to their names, it gave their outcome. They either mustered out at the end of the war, or if they got killed during the war, it kind of gives you an idea what happened to them. And it said killed by guerrilla. And it gave the dates, and the dates matched up at the same time Jack was taking revenge.
Wow.
So that's how I found who it was.
That's a lot of research you have to
5
do.
years. I did 5 years of research on it.
That's just not writing a book in 3 months.
No.
That is a lot
Well,
of
you
work.
can, but
The details are
half
there, and I think historical fiction and science fiction are the same in that way. Anything that's science fiction has to be real. You can't
Right.
just make up terms and throw them
Right.
around.
And that's the part about historic fiction. A lot of people that read it are historians, and so they're going to judge you on the historical content. It's hard to on the actual, the dialogue and stuff, because there's no memoirs to see exactly what they had to say. But he met, he met General Grant, made friends with General Grant, but yet he knew General Pillow. So the head of the Confederate Army and the head of the Union Army, he got to meet both of them, got to know both of them, and did some business dealings with both of them, or business with one, and got a personal relationship developed with Grant. So he was kind of an intriguing character. And then later on, he gets to know Nathan Bedford Forrest,
Who is a very controversial figure.
Yeah, and then in book 3, he winds up becoming a scout for Forrest in book 3.
Nathan Bedford Forrest, for those of you not in Nashville, wouldn't know this, but the bust of him is at
Yes, it's being in question now.
the Capitol
Mm-hmm.
here, and a lot of people are trying to petition to have that removed.
Sure.
Very controversial, because after the Civil War, Forrest was made head of the Klan, wasn't he? But he got out of that. He had a turn of faith, and
within 3 years, he wanted it shut down.
he wanted the Klan shut down and didn't want any part of that, and saw how wrong it was. But people are only getting, again, the one side of
They
the...
just get the one side of the story.
Yes.
Here, let me throw you some local trivia.
All right.
Here's just some local trivia. You ever heard of the Maxwell House Hotel?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Where Nashville House Coffee came.
Yeah, and of course that came from Teddy Roosevelt, as the story goes.
Yes.
Making
The
his
last
grand
straw.
tour, good to the last straw. Of course, when I used to write radio jingles, I wrote that for Otis Elevator Company, good to the last straw. Yeah. So, but anyway, it was a prison during the Civil War.
Wow.
Before the hotel was completed, the Union Army took over Nashville, and they wanted to have a place in town as a prison, and it became a place where they kept civilians as well as soldiers. After the Battle of Chickamauga, it filled up. But one of Jack's sons, Robert, was one of the local guerrillas back in Stewart County. He was captured and brought here to the Maxwell House Hotel, and then Jack comes and breaks him out. So you'll find that in book 2. Interesting enough, in its own historical record, there was, because they had so many of the Confederate soldiers in the upstairs part of the Maxwell House, they were serving breakfast in the bottom portion of it. So when they called mess call, They were going down the steps and the stairwell collapsed.
Wow.
And it killed several hundred Confederate prisoners when the
Wow.
stairwell collapsed. And so the women of the city were coming in to try to beat them, help nurse them and get them out of the wreckage. So, but that all happened in Maxwell House Hotel, and that's some of that little pieces of history that gets lost.
I forget which book I was reading. It could have been A History of the Bellmead Plantation, but talking about the battles in Nashville, and I guess it's true anywhere there have been battles like that, is how the rest of Nashville just went on functioning as a city, while in these different places the war was raging and these huge battles were going on. And yet here in town, people are going about their business and shopping and doing anything you would do in a normal day.
As much as it could. Now the refugee movement was a big
Later on, yeah.
There was quite a bit of a large exodus out of Nashville when we spoke of Forrest earlier. When after the fall of Fort Donelson, Forrest came through here to help evacuate, and it was a huge exodus at that time. A lot of the local residents, for fear of retribution, because they were strong supporters of the South, they packed up and left.
Now Tennessee was really valuable to the Union because of the Tennessee River.
Oh yeah.
Because they could come down the river and attack from behind the lines.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting stories. Rick Revel is our guest, and the book is called In the Hills of Tennessee. If you're a Civil War fan or want to know about the Civil War, please check his book out. People can get that.
Yeah, it'd be www.rickrevel.com. rickrevel.com.
And you could probably also get his CD there. It's called Making It in America. Man, thank you for being on the show and talking to us. Good luck with the book, and we can't wait for number 2 to come out.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for watching the show today. We hope you enjoyed it. Got a little bit of a history lesson in there for you, too. Make sure you catch me. Oh, you know what? I've been forgetting to do this.
All right.
We have this sitting here.
Yes.
Let's do this. And then we can...
This is not where the snake jumps out.
No. It's asked and answered, and I don't know why, but I keep forgetting. Our viewers from around the world, yes, you, have been sending in questions. All right? So just reach in there.
You need to draw a question.
Yeah, just reach in there and we'll take a look at the question.
And the question is,
if you could instantly become an expert at something, what would it be? And that is from our correspondent Zoe in Glasgow. If you could become an expert in anything, what would it be?
me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll be a psychoanalyst. A psychoanalyst, if I could be that, but I don't think I will. My granddaddy said I'd make a good one, but a psychoanalyst, that's what I'd be. Yes, if I could be anything, I'd be a psychoanalyst.
All right.
You get paid little, but you act like you know a lot.
That defines a politician. Oh, no, you get paid a lot and no very
less a politician.
Thanks for that question. So if you'd like your question on Asked and Answered, just send us a message with your question and we'll get it on. Unless I forget about it. Sorry. Anyway, that's the show today. Thanks to Rick Revel for being on the show. Don't forget to get his book and CD. Catch me every Sunday morning on Chris Country, all across the UK, following the Bobby Bones Show at midday, and every Thursday morning on 88.9 Tamworth FM in Tamworth, New South Wales, Australia, with Jody Crosby and John Wolfe. We'll see you next time on the show. Thanks for watching.
Oh, my